The thing about humiliation, it doesn't knock on your door. It storms in, uninvited, like it owns the place. And for Jonathan Miles, it walked right up to him in the form of two overzealous hotel security guards on a Thursday night. The Grand Crown Hotel's lobby glittered like a movie set, crystal chandeliers, marble columns, the faint hum of a jazz quartet in the corner. It smelled faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. Jonathan had been here for all of 30 seconds, his suitcase rolling behind him, when a hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your room key," said the taller guard, his tone edged with suspicion. Jonathan turned, his brows knitting in mild surprise. "I haven't even checked in yet." "That's funny," the shorter guard said, stepping closer, "because we've had reports of suspicious individuals wandering the premises." His eyes darted to Jonathan's tailored suit, then to his face, lingering just long enough for the insult to be clear. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He'd dealt with this look before, the kind that said, "I've already decided who you are, and it's not someone who belongs here." "Suspicious individuals," Jonathan repeated, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "And you think I qualify because—" The tall guard didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward a seating area by the potted palms. "Please step over here, sir." It wasn't a request. Several guests slowed down to watch, curiosity prickling the air. One man in a pinstripe suit whispered to his companion, phone already angled for a discreet video. The receptionist looked up, her hands frozen over the keyboard. Jonathan glanced at his watch. He was supposed to be upstairs in 10 minutes, on a secure video call with a team spread across 3 continents. The kind of call that decided international policy. But now he stood in the middle of a luxury lobby, held like a shoplifter. "You're making a mistake," Jonathan said evenly. The shorter guard chuckled. "You'd be surprised how often we hear that." The manager appeared, thin, a woman in her 40s with a tight bun and the harried air of someone used to smoothing over disasters. She approached with a bright but brittle smile. "Gentlemen, what's the issue?" The tall guard didn't let go of Jonathan's arm. "No issue, ma'am. Just escorting a trespasser out." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a trespasser." The manager's smile faltered. She glanced at Jonathan, perhaps noting the cut of his suit, the polished leather briefcase at his side, the measured way he spoke. Something didn't add up, but she didn't contradict her security team yet. "What's your name, sir?" she asked. "Jonathan Miles." Her brow furrowed. The name seemed to ring a bell, but she couldn't place it. "And do you have a reservation with us, Mr. Miles?" "I do. Under the name Miles International Holdings." The shorter guard smirked. "That's convenient." Jonathan's patience was fraying. "It's also true. And if you'd like to call your corporate office, they'll confirm that I'm not just a guest, I am here on invitation from your board chairman." That got a reaction. The manager's eyes widened, but before she could speak, the tall guard's radio crackled. A voice muttered something about a possible match to a suspect from earlier. Jonathan exhaled slowly. He could feel the eyes on him, the weight of the silent jury that was the hotel lobby. He knew exactly what they saw. A black man in an expensive space. And for too many, that math never added up. "You're embarrassing yourselves," Jonathan said quietly. "And more importantly, you're embarrassing your hotel." The shorter guard didn't flinch. "We'll take that risk." Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, unlocked it, and held it up. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "A phone," the shorter guard said flatly. "It's a secure government-issued satellite device," Jonathan replied. "And in 30 seconds, I can have a very different kind of security in this lobby." The manager's face went pale. Jonathan's voice lowered, every word deliberate. "Last chance. Let go of my arm." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in the taller guard's eyes. But before he could react, 3 more people entered the lobby, 2 men in dark suits and earpieces, and a woman in a navy dress who radiated authority. The woman strode forward. "Director Miles," she said, her tone sharp with urgency. "We've been looking for you." The guards froze. "Director?" the manager echoed, her voice small. Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks. "Yes," he said. "Director of the National Intelligence Agency." You could have heard a pin drop. Jonathan looked from the guards to the manager, his expression unreadable. Now, where were we? The 2 security guards shifted uncomfortably, like schoolboys caught cheating in front of the principal. The taller one released Jonathan's arm slowly, his fingers lingering for half a second too long. as if reluctant to admit fault. The shorter guard took a step back, glancing anywhere but at Jonathan's face. The woman in the navy dress, a senior intelligence officer, by the look of her posture and the precision of her movements, nodded at Jonathan in a way that was almost imperceptible to anyone else. It was a subtle acknowledgement. You're still in control. The manager's voice cracked as she spoke. Director Miles, too, had no idea. Jonathan raised a hand to stop her. That's the problem, he said evenly. You didn't know? You assumed. A hush swept through the lobby. Guests who had been pretending to scroll on their phones were now openly staring. A couple across the marble floor exchanged glances that seemed to say, "Oh God, this is about to go viral." Jonathan turned slightly toward the two agents who had entered with the woman. Secure the suite. I'll be up shortly. Yes, sir, one of them replied, disappearing toward the elevators. The shorter guard found his voice again, but it was thinner now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Look, we were just doing our job. No, Jonathan interrupted, his tone like a scalpel. You weren't doing your job. You were doing your version of your job filtered through bias, ignorance, and arrogance. That's not security. That's profiling. The taller guard swallowed hard. Jonathan's gaze swept the lobby, taking in the bystanders, the manager, the lingering scent of expensive perfume mixed with something sour fear. Do you know how many times I've had to have this conversation in my life? He asked no one in particular. Do you know how exhausting it is to be treated as a threat first and a human being second? The manager stepped forward, her hands twisting around her clipboard. Director Miles, please let's discuss this in private. I can assure you the hotel will. Jonathan's voice cut through hers. No, we're not going to sweep this under a Persian rug in some conference room. We're going to have this conversation right here, where it happened. In the open. The shorter guard bristled. With all due respect. Jonathan's eyes snapped to him. You don't get to talk about respect right now. The shorter man's mouth closed with an audible click. Jonathan took a step closer to the manager. Do you train your staff on how to handle guests without bias? Her cheeks flushed. We have general sensitivity training. Clearly not enough, Jonathan said. Phones were up, now half a dozen people recording every word. Somewhere in the background, the jazz quartet had stopped playing, the last note hanging in the air like it too was waiting to see what would happen next. Jonathan's voice softened, but it carried a weight that made everyone lean in. I'm not here to ruin careers, but I am here to demand accountability. You see, I can walk into a war zone and negotiate with hostile leaders. I can read a room full of politicians and know exactly who's lying. But I can't walk into a hotel lobby in my own country without someone deciding I don't belong here. And that is unacceptable. The woman in the navy dress glanced at her watch, then at Jonathan. Sir, the president is expecting your call. Jonathan nodded slightly. He can wait a few minutes. This matters too. The taller guard's voice was almost a whisper. We didn't mean. Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. I know you didn't mean. But intent doesn't erase impact. You need to live with that. The manager cleared her throat, her voice trembling. Director Miles, I will personally ensure a full investigation, and I will invite you to speak to our staff, if you're willing. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. I'm willing, but not as a favor to you. As a responsibility to every guest who comes after me. He glanced around at the gathering crowd, his words deliberate. And I want this hotel chain to publicly commit to reform. Real training, real policy change. Not just a press release and a photo op. The manager nodded quickly, almost desperately. Yes, absolutely. Jonathan stepped back, adjusting the lapels of his suit. The movement was calm, but it carried the quiet authority of someone who had just rewritten the rules of the room. The woman in the navy dress stepped forward again. Sir, your suite is ready, and the call is patched through. Jonathan gave her a small nod, then turned back to the manager. This conversation isn't over. You'll hear from my office tomorrow. Without another word, he walked toward the elevators, the two intelligence agents falling into step behind him. The crowd parted instinctively, like the sea making way for a ship. The elevator doors closed, and only then did the lobby seem to exhale. The shorter guard rubbed the back of his neck, muttering something under his breath. The taller one stared at the marble floor as if it might swallow him whole. The manager stood frozen for a moment, then spun toward her staff. Shut down the lobby cameras to the press, she ordered sharply. And for God's sake, get PR on the phone. Upstairs, Jonathan entered the suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, its lights glittering like 1,000 watchful eyes. He set his briefcase down on the glass table, then loosened his tie. The woman in Navy Special Agent Claire Donovan closed the door behind them. "You sure you want this going public?" she asked. "It'll be everywhere by morning." Jonathan sank into a leather armchair. "Good. Let them see it. Let them talk about it. Change doesn't happen in silence." Claire nodded. "I'll coordinate with communications." The secure call was waiting. Jonathan put in his earpiece, the weight of global intelligence shifting back onto his shoulders. Yet as world leaders began to speak in his ear, a part of his mind stayed in that lobby, in the faces of the guards, the tightening of the manager's smile, the way strangers had pulled out their phones to witness a moment of everyday injustice. He wasn't just thinking about policy anymore. He was thinking about the battle at home, the one fought not with troops, but with truth. And he intended to win both. By the time Jonathan finished the secure call, it was nearly midnight. The city below shimmered under the rain, neon lights streaking across wet streets. Claire was still there, sitting across from him with her tablet open, eyes scanning the flood of incoming reports. She looked up. "It's already started." Jonathan leaned forward. "How bad?" Claire swiped to a news feed. Dozens of headlines glared back. Intelligence director mistaken for trespasser at luxury hotel. Racial profiling incident involves head of national security. Hotel security detained Wrong Manhas, one of the most powerful in the country. Clips from shaky cell phone videos were already circulating. One showed the moment the shorter guard smirked at Jonathan. Another caught Jonathan's calm, cutting words about intent versus impact. Each video had been watched hundreds of thousands of times, and the number was climbing by the second. Jonathan studied the footage in silence. Claire broke it first. "The president's office just sent a statement. They're framing it as an example of why diversity training matters." Jonathan gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's diplomatic." Claire hesitated. "But, sir, this isn't just a PR storm. Civil rights groups are already reaching out. They want you to speak at a rally in D.C. this weekend." Jonathan rubbed his temples. "Claire, I'm the director of the NI. I'm supposed to operate in shadows, not on protest stages." She tilted her head. "Maybe this time you don't get to hide." Jonathan looked at her sharply, but there was no challenge in her gaze, only truth. He turned back to the window, the city lights winking like 1,000 tiny verdicts. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "It's about every person who's been treated the same way without a camera to catch it. And every one of them deserves better than an apology letter." Claire set the tablet down. "Then use your platform. If you can negotiate with world leaders, you can sure as hell negotiate change here." Jonathan didn't answer, but the seed was planted. By morning, the Grand Crown Hotel was surrounded by a swarm of reporters. Satellite trucks lined the street, cables snaking over sidewalks, microphones shoved into every guest's path. Inside the suite, Jonathan sat at the table with a cup of black coffee, scanning overnight briefings. Claire was on the phone with the White House communications team, her voice clipped and precise. The door buzzed. An assistant opened it to reveal Margaret Dalton, CEO of the Grand Crown China, a woman known for her icy boardroom demeanor and ironclad control over her brand. She stepped in briskly, her diamond brooch catching the light. "Director Miles," she said, extending a hand. Jonathan stood but didn't shake it. "Ms. Dalton." She let her hand fall, her expression tightening. "I'm here to personally apologize for last night's misunderstanding." Jonathan's brow arched. "Misunderstanding? Is that what we're calling it?" Dalton's tone didn't falter. "I assure you, the employees involved will face consequences. We'll also issue a public statement clarifying our position against discrimination." Jonathan held up a hand. "Spare me the polished statements. I'm not interested in PR damage control." She blinked, and used to being cut off. "Then what are you interested in?" Jonathan leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Permanent change. Mandatory, in-depth bias training across every property you own. A public commitment to diversity in your hiring and leadership. A zero-tolerance policy for profiling enforced, not just written on paper." Dalton's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's ambitious." "It's necessary," Jonathan replied. "Because if you think this is about a single night in your lobby, you're not paying attention. This is about trust. And right now, your brand doesn't have mine or the public's." Dalton studied him for a long moment. You're leveraging this, she said finally. I'm using it, Jonathan corrected. There's a difference. Claire stepped in. Ms. Dalton, if you're smart, you'll take this offer. Otherwise, you'll be negotiating in the court of public opinion, and that's a war you can't win. Dalton's jaw tightened. I'll speak to my board. Jonathan leaned back. You have 48 hours. The next 2 days were a blur. Interviews, policy drafts, calls with advocacy groups. The videos continued to spread. Jonathan's measured but unflinching words replayed on every major network, dissected by pundits, hashtagged across social media. Some commentators praised his composure. Others accused him of exploiting the incident for personal gain. Jonathan ignored both camps, focusing instead on what could be done before the news cycle moved on. On the third morning, Dalton called. We're in, she said without preamble. Full implementation of the reforms you outlined. We'll make it public this afternoon. Jonathan allowed himself a single nod. Good. And I'll be there to make the announcement with you. There was a pause on the line. That's unusual for someone in your position. Jonathan's tone was matter of fact. So was getting handcuffed in your lobby. The press conference was held in the same marble-floored lobby where it had all begun. Cameras flashed as Jonathan stepped up to the podium beside Dalton. 3 nights ago, he began, I walked into this hotel as a paying guest. I left as a target of bias. I'm not here today to talk about my own dignity. It was never truly in question. I'm here to talk about the dignity of every person who walks through doors like these and deserves to be treated with respect, no matter the color of their skin. Dalton stood stiffly beside him, but she didn't interrupt as he outlined the changes the hotel chain would make. And to those watching, Jonathan concluded, remember this. Change is not the result of apologies. Change comes from action, and action comes from pressure. Keep pressing. The room erupted in questions, but Jonathan didn't take them. He stepped away from the podium, leaving Dalton to face the reporters. As he moved toward the exit, a young black bellhop caught his eye. The man gave a small, grateful note in acknowledgement between strangers who understood the stakes. Jonathan returned the nod. That, more than the flashing cameras, told him he'd done something that mattered. The press conference made the evening news in nearly every major market. Clips of Jonathan's speech were replayed alongside footage of protests in front of other Grand Crown hotels across the country. By the next morning, the incident had become a case study not just in racial profiling, but in how quickly a private humiliation could explode into a national reckoning. Jonathan sat in his office at the NIA headquarters, a file open in front of him, but his eyes far away. Claire stood in the doorway, a coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. You've seen this? She asked, tossing a tablet onto his desk. On the screen was a petition the Miles Initiative calling for mandatory anti-bias training across all major hotel chains in the country. It had over 2 million signatures in less than a week. Jonathan picked it up, scanning the comments. I was thrown out of a hotel lobby while waiting for my husband to park the car. I had the police called on me because I was too well dressed for the neighborhood. I'm 16, and I already know the look that says you don't belong here. He set the tablet down slowly. Claire, make sure the sponsors of this petition get in touch with my office. I want to meet them. You're going to back it officially? She asked. Jonathan nodded. If I don't, who will? 3 weeks later, he was standing in front of the Senate Oversight Committee. The chamber buzzed with tension. Cameras were rolling, and the air was thick with political theater. A senator from Georgia leaned forward. Director Miles, some say your actions blur the line between your role as an intelligence officer and as a political activist. How do you respond? Jonathan didn't hesitate. My role is to protect the security of this nation. That includes protecting its people from threats foreign or domestic. Bias isn't just a moral failing. It's a security risk. When we profile instead of assess, we make mistakes. And mistakes in security can cost lives. Another senator interjected. Are you suggesting Congress should legislate hospitality industry practices? A murmur rippled through the chamber. Outside, on the Capitol steps, reporters swarmed. Jonathan didn't stop for questions. He had somewhere else to be. That evening, he stood in the small auditorium of a community center in Baltimore, surrounded by folding chairs and mismatched tables. This was where he'd grown up, where he'd first learned that some doors opened easily, while others stayed locked no matter how politely you knocked. In the front row sat his mother, her hair silver now, but her eyes still sharp as ever. Next to her was the bellhop from the hotel. His name was Marcus, and half a dozen other service workers who'd reached out after the press conference. Jonathan spoke without notes. I've sat across from dictators and warlords, from people who would rather see the world burn than give up power. And I'll tell you something, they all have one thing in common. They believe some people matter more than others. The only way to prove them wrong is to live differently, to build systems that say everyone matters. He paused, letting the words settle. That's what the Miles Initiative is about. Not me, not my title, but the kid who's told he doesn't belong in a lobby, the traveler who's treated like a criminal, the worker who's afraid to speak up. We're not going to wait for permission to change that. We're going to change it ourselves. The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from people who've been waiting to hear someone say exactly what's been sitting in their chests for years. 2 months later, the Miles Initiative had gone from a petition to a nationwide training and certification program adopted by several major hotel chains, airlines, and even some police departments. The Grand Crown Hotel in D.C., where it had all begun, now displayed a plaque in its lobby. This property is certified under the Miles Initiative, committed to equality, dignity, and respect for all guests. Jonathan stood in front of it one evening, alone. He'd just finished a long day of classified briefings, and the city was quiet under a winter sky. The lobby was different now. Staff greeted guests warmly, without the guarded suspicion he'd once seen in their eyes. Marcus, now promoted to front desk supervisor, spotted him and came over with a grin. "Director Miles," Marcus said. "Didn't think I'd see you here again." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Neither did I." Marcus gestured toward the plaque. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Jonathan looked around. "It's a start." They stood there in companionable silence for a moment. Then Jonathan glanced at the elevator, the same one he'd taken upstairs the night everything changed. "You know," he said quietly, "the funny thing about security is, it's not just about locks and guards. It's about trust. And once trust is broken, you don't get it back with apologies. You earn it, one honest act at a time." Marcus nodded slowly. "Guess we've all got work to do, then." Jonathan extended his hand. Marcus took it firmly. And for the first time since that night, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in that lobby before. He felt like he belonged. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.